good evening, and welcome. You're listening to calm, boring, sleepy history, where the past unfolds at its slowest, most soothing pace. Tonight we begin our quiet descent into a chapter of American colonial history, a time thick with uncertainty, suspicion, and quiet desperation. A time when shadows stretched long, when the forest seemed to whisper rumors, and when truth was as difficult to grasp as smoke rising from a hearth. The Salem Witch Trials, you may have heard of them, a frenzy of fear in a small Massachusetts village, a tragic episode of injustice. But tonight we will not simply recount names and dates. We will settle into the rhythm of a lifelong past, understanding how such fear could bloom from soil rich in hardship, religion, and isolation. Our journey tonight is divided into 4 gently woven segments. First, we will immerse ourselves in the daily life of a Puritan villager in late 17th century New England, the textures, routines, and rituals of their world. From there we will follow the slow rise of hysteria that culminated in the infamous trials, looking carefully at the people swept into its cold current. Afterward, we'll shift our gaze to a quieter mystery, how the beliefs in witchcraft emerged and why they settled so deeply in the colonial mind. Finally, we will contrast the experience of ordinary villagers with that of the elite judges, clergy, and politicians who watched, intervened, or quietly allowed the terror to take root. So breathe in deeply. Let the flicker of candlelight soften your mind. You're far from the present moment now. The world around you has grown quieter. The voices of the past are gentle, and we will walk among them carefully. Let us begin. Imagine yourself in a wooden house, not much larger than a modern shed. The floor beneath your feet is packed dirt or uneven wooden planks. The air is heavy with the scent of wood smoke mingled with damp wool and faint traces of cooked cornmeal. Outside, the wind sifts through brittle trees, stirring loose snow across a patchy yard. You are a resident of Salem Village, a small inward-facing settlement on the edge of a vast, dark forest. It is the year 1692, and winter still lingers in the air. Each day is structured by necessity. Wake with the sun if the cold allows sleep at all. Feed the fire, tend the livestock, prepare the simple meal. You might eat corn mush or a thin broth or stale bread soft in water. Nothing is wasted. Even hunger becomes a familiar companion, something endured more than feared. Most homes have a single room shared by all. Privacy is rare. Furniture is sparse, a rough table, a few stools, perhaps a cradle. For warmth, you huddle near the hearth. The fire burns constantly, not for comfort, but for survival. The work is constant. Children help fetch water from frozen wells or chop kindling. Women spin wool, mend garments, churn butter. Men tend to fields, hunt, or repair tools dulled by labor. And always there is the ever-present church. Religion is not a part of life. It is life. The church bell marks your time. Sermons are long and stern. Ministers speak of wrath, sin, and the devil's endless attempts to tempt the righteous. You listen not because you are eager, but because you must. To skip a service is to invite suspicion. Most villagers cannot read beyond the Bible, yet all know Scripture by heart. It is recited daily like breath. Every illness, every failed crop, every unexpected death is attributed to sin, either yours or someone else's. The nights are long and dark, with only tallow candles for light. Families gather near the hearth and speak in hushed tones. Often they speak of their neighbors, the Thompsons. Cow stopped giving milk. Was it the frost, or perhaps something else? The mind fills in the silence with questions and with answers, and then with fear. The forest that edges Salem is not just a place of trees. It is a spiritual frontier, a realm of danger and mystery. Native tribes still live beyond the edge of settlement, and many Puritans believe them to be tools of Satan. When the wind howls through the trees at night, it does not bring peace. It stirs the imagination, and in such a tightly wound world, even imagination can become dangerous. Sleep does not come easily. You lie on a straw mattress wrapped in blankets roughly stitched from worn cloth. The wind scratches the shutters. Somewhere outside a branch snaps. You pull the blanket tighter. You whisper a prayer. Such was the rhythm of their lives. One day blending into the next seasons, marked not by color, but by labor, faith, both a comfort and a burden. Each small joy like a candle flickering in the dark. This is the world in which the Salem Witch Trials were born, a place already thick with fear, where hardship was constant and suspicion hovered like smoke from a dying fire. Soon that smoke would catch flame. It began as such things often do, not with fire and fury, but with whispers, with strange fits, with a child crying out in the night. In the winter of 1692, the Reverend Samuel Parris of Salem Village faced a troubling dilemma, not a theological one, but something far more personal. His young daughter Betty and his niece Abigail Williams had begun behaving oddly. They screamed, they contorted, they claimed to see things no one else could, invisible specters pinching them, dark shadows standing at the foot of their beds. Parris, a rigid and anxious man already, unpopular among his congregation, turned to the one explanation his Puritan world could accept. Witchcraft doctors found no physical cause, and so the invisible world offered a more convenient answer. Witchcraft, they said, had found its way into Salem. Word spread quickly. Children began accusing others. A slave woman named Tituba, brought from the Korean and living in Paris household, was among the first to be questioned. Under pressure, she confessed. She spoke of a book signed by witches of flying through the air, of the devil taking animal forms. Her words stirred both fascination and dread. The judges listened, the girls nodded, and so the machinery of accusation began to turn. More names followed. Sarah Good, a homeless woman with sharp words and ragged clothing. Sarah Osborne, who had not attended church in some time. Both were poor, both were outsiders, and both were convenient scapegoats. The trials quickly became a ritual of their own. Accusers would collapse in fits during court. They'd scream that the spirit of the accused was tormenting them, even as the accused stood silently nearby. The afflicted shook, wailed, pointed trembling fingers. Judges nodded solemnly. Ministers whispered scripture, and the noose somewhere nearby waited. Imagine standing in that wooden meeting house. The benches creak. The air is still. You hear the moans of the afflicted, the quiet weeping of the accused, the scratch of the clerk's pen recording names and verdicts. Outside, the wind stirs dust along the path to Gallows Hill. Gallows Hill, though little more than a rise in the earth, became the final stage. One by one, those convicted were led there. 19 would be hanged. One, an elderly man named Giles Corey, refused to plead. He was pressed to death beneath heavy stones. His only words, more weight. The panic spread beyond Salem Village. Soon Andover, Ipswich, and other towns joined the chorus of accusations. Jails overflowed. Families were torn apart. Accusations leapt between neighbors across generations, even within families. A husband might accuse a wife. A child might name a parent. Safety once imagined in silence became impossible. And what was a witch? Not someone with warts and potions. Not someone flying on a broomstick. but anyone who was different, independent women, midwives, healers, those with land, those who didn't fit. The courts admitted spectral evidence testimony about dreams and visions. Such evidence needed no proof, only belief. A dream could condemn, a vision could kill, logic was no longer the law of the land. Faith and fear took its place. The trials reached their height in the summer of 1692. But by autumn, the air began to shift. Prominent figures began to doubt. Governor William Phips, disturbed by the chaos and the growing list of the accused, some of whom included respected members of the community, called a halt. The use of spectral evidence was questioned. The court was dissolved. By early 1693, those remaining in jail were gradually released. No further executions followed, and just as swiftly as it had begun, the storm passed, but it left behind a quiet wreckage. Empty homes, widowed families, a stain that time could not easily wash away. Years later, the colony would declare a day of fasting and reflection. Restitutions were offered, and in time apologies came, but the sorrow lingered. And even now, centuries later, the question remains, how could it happen? How could so many believe so deeply in something so cruel? The answer lies not in evil, but in fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of change, fear of those who do not fit neatly into the fold. And it began as such fear often does, with a whisper. Let us drift now, not through events, but through thoughts, through the shape of belief and the quiet roots of fear. To understand why the Salem Witch Trials could happen, one must understand the mind that believed in witches, not as metaphor, but as reality. In the 1600s, the line between the visible and the invisible world was then perhaps non-existent. The devil was not an idea. He was a presence. He walked the earth. He made bargains. He sent storms and sickness, and he did not work alone. Witchcraft in this world was not fantasy. It was as real as the crops in your field or the frost on your window pane. It explained what science could not. A miscarriage, a sudden illness, a failed harvest. These were not accidents. They were attacks. For the Puritan settlers of New England, life was deeply uncertain. Their colonies clung to the edges of vast wilderness. Native peoples, disease and famine all loomed beyond the fragile safety of cleared land and timber walls. And when life feels fragile, belief becomes armor. The Puritans believed they had entered into a covenant with God. Their society was to be pure, righteous, and orderly, a shining example to the world. But such purity was hard to maintain. Tempers frayed, disputes simmered. Property lines were contested, ministers clashed. And always the devil was said to be watching. Witches in this belief system were not simply people who practiced magic. They were those who had made a compact with Satan. They had given themselves over to him in exchange for power, and they could harm others through invisible means called maleficium. Milk would curdle livestock, would sicken a child, would wither. A person might feel a sudden weight upon their chest at night, unable to breathe. These were all seen as signs. The belief in witchcraft stretched across oceans. In Europe, thousands had already been executed over the previous century. Trials in Germany, France, Scotland, and England left scars on the collective psyche. In Massachusetts, these ideas found fertile ground, though tinged with the special severity of the Puritan worldview. Books like Malleus Maleficarum, written in the late 5th-10th century, laid out methods to identify and prosecute witches. It described how witches were said to fly to meet in secret, sabbats to steal infants or cause storms. These ideas filtered into popular sermons and folk stories. Children heard them beside the hearth. Elders whispered them on long winter nights. and so belief passed from mouth to mind, from fear to judgment. Even objects carried this belief. A witch bottle, a small glass container filled with sharp objects' hair or nails, might be buried near a doorway to ward off curses. A horseshoe might hang above the threshold. Marks might be carved into door frames. Everyday life was stitched with invisible protections. The afflicted girls in Salem were not inventing an entirely new fear. They were drawing upon images already familiar: specters, pinching, flying, animal familiars. These were the vocabulary of their terror, shaped long before the trials began. It's worth noting that many of the accused were people who had unsettled others in quiet ways. Women who spoke too freely, people who lived alone, healers who used unfamiliar herbs, or those who owned property, something unusual for women. These were the ones most often seen as suspicious. In a society built on conformity, difference was dangerous. And yet beneath this fear was something older still. The archetype of the witch female, powerful, uncontrollable, has roots far deeper than Puritan theology. She appeared in classical myth, medieval folklore, and peasant tales, always a symbol of inversion of a world turned upside down, where a woman commands spirits, where a neighbor cannot be trusted, where the rules no longer hold. To sleep in such a world required faith or fear or both. So now imagine yourself once more in Salem village. The wind taps gently at the shutters. You hear the distant cry of an animal. You see the moon, round and pale, hovering above the woods, and you wonder softly what unseen forces might be moving beyond the trees. These are the shadows that linger not just in the forest, but in the mind. Now let us shift our gaze from the flickering candles of village homes to the somber halls where decisions were made, from the homespun lives of the accused to the polished shoes of the men who judged them. The Salem Witch Trials were not simply a frenzy of frightened villagers. They were sanctioned by courts, by ministers, by governors. The machinery of justice, such as it was, turned slowly, solemnly, and at least for a time without mercy. Presiding over many of the trials was Judge William Stoughton, a man of stern principle, deeply devout, and convinced that the devil's agents walked among them. Stoughton allowed spectral evidence to be admitted, visions and dreams, things only the accuser could see. To modern minds this may seem absurd, but to Stoughton it was justice deeply rooted in the belief that the soul could speak when the body was deceived. He was not alone. Other magistrates, men with titles, property, education, participated fully in the proceedings. Some did so with conviction, others perhaps with unease, but they sat in judgment nonetheless, their words carrying the weight of death. Then there were the ministers. Cotton Mather, perhaps the most well-known voice of the time, urged caution, but did not condemn the trials outright. He believed that the devil could mimic innocence, and that witches might hide behind the most ordinary faces. His writings were deeply influential, and his voice, though not the loudest, in the courtroom echoed in the minds of those who sentenced others to die. Yet not all men of status supported the trials. Increase Mather, Cotton's father, grew uneasy. He warned against relying on invisible evidence. It were better, he wrote, that 10 suspected witches should escape than that one innocent person should be condemned. But his was a quieter voice, and by the time it gained influence, many had already died. Governor William Phipps, recently returned from battles in Maine, intervened as the hysteria grew. At first he approved the special court created to handle witchcraft cases. But as the accusations crept higher into the social ladder, touching respected churchgoers, landowners, and even the wife of the governor's close friend, he acted. He dissolved the court in late 1692 and by the following year he had begun to pardon the remaining prisoners. But the elite did not all suffer equally. None of them were hanged. None of them were crushed beneath stones. Accusations that reached too high were often dismissed. Poor, the outcast, and the unprotected bore the weight of punishment, and justice wore a calm and practiced face. Let us pause here and picture the court, a wooden room sparse and cold. The judges sit behind a long bench, their collars are stiff, their brows furrowed. A clerk scratches away with a quill. Before them stands a woman in homespun wool, her face lined by hardship, her hands trembling not from guilt, but from frost and fear. Above her, the crossbeam of the ceiling seems too low. The silence is too long, and the verdict already written in the air. In this space, power did not shout. It whispered, it wore robes, it spoke with conviction, and often it was wrong. After the trials ended, many of the elite distanced themselves from their roles. Some offered apologies, others remained silent. A few, like Judge Stoughton, never admitted fault. The colony's leaders moved on. New laws were passed. New fears arose, but the memory remained. For those who had lost a mother, a sister, a friend, there was no forgetting. This contrast, the ordinary villager consumed by suspicion and the learned elite protected by station, was not unique to Salem. It is a rhythm found throughout history. Those without voice are judged, those with voice judge. And so we see that the trials were not only about witchcraft or fear or faith, but about power. Who holds it, who wields it, and who pays the price when it is used carelessly. In the quiet after the storm, Salem village was never the same, nor were the men who ruled it. And now, as the candlelight of the past flickers low, we gently step back from the snow-covered lanes of Salem, from the wooden courtrooms and wind-swept fields, the crowded jail cells and the silent forests that once brimmed with fear. The Salem Witch Trials are often remembered as a cautionary tale, a time of madness, of injustice, but in truth, they were shaped by ordinary lives. People trying to survive in a harsh, uncertain world. People who believed they were doing what was right. People who were afraid. Thank you for joining me tonight for walking slowly through the shadows of Salem. May your dreams be gentle and your rest long. Good night.